we have it? Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? Hope. Yes, great. Thank you so much. Thanks for your patience as we got all online. We're dealing with a lot of different time zones right now. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Leslie Gagne, and I am Associate Curator of Photographs at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, and along with the co-organizer of this panel, James Clisson, at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. It's really my pleasure to welcome you today to this discussion about shifting curatorial practice across borders. Before we dive in, we have some housekeeping. As a disclaimer, please note that all views expressed in the conference are those of each individual speaker and do not reflect the opinions or viewpoints of AAMC or the AAMC Foundation. Also, please note that we will be taking questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom chats there. And should we not be able to get to your questions this afternoon, please do reach out to us. We are happy to continue this discussion in other places. And finally, each of us will be working on our PowerPoints separately. So please do bear with us as we work through the technology and move from one thing to the next. So first of all, I wanted to thank AAMC for granting us the space for such a conversation and for persevering in making this conference happen. And of course, for getting us all Zoom ready. Thank you so much to Judith, Lucy, Marianne, and everyone at AAMC. And thanks to all of you who have joined us online in this new format. And of course, thanks to our panelists who are not only willing to fly out to Seattle in the past, but have also been open to chatting at all odd hours in multi-time zone conversations. Someone here right now is awake at 4 in the morning, so thank you so much. And really, during this conversation, we want to address the topic of curating across borders, which at the moment seems even all the more urgent than ever before. So I will go ahead and share my PowerPoint. There we go. So some of the questions that are guiding this panel is how do we really address and speak about concerns of inclusion and exclusion within a global context? And how does the local affect this interpretation? And how do we really work with these terms when we're living in this world? And how do we address our local and international audiences? And in a time of global crisis as we are now, how do we really try to curate across borders? The panelists today really will help us have this conversation, and they are Bridget Cooks at UC Irvine, David Gutierrez Castañeda who's waving, I guess, at UNAM in Mexico, Leslie Ma at M+ in Hong Kong, and James, who was with me, the co-organizer of this panel at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. And they all bring to today's virtual table a range of experiences that will help us broaden this conversation beyond the scope of our individual institutions. I came to this topic in part because I spent some time living in Taiwan, and then I moved back to the United States. And I now find myself focusing mostly on a collection that really is about American history and through the genre of portraiture. So our collection is to a great degree of presidents and Civil War figures, and we strive with each acquisition to bring diversity into our collection. So the slide that I'm sharing now shows you with all of the presidents and with a lot of these Civil War figures, where our numbers are, and something that we see where photography is about 50% of the collection. And then we also divide our collection in different ways, the way we do this on TMS and on our database. But with each acquisition, we really wanted to bring in more diversity through gender, background, and field of endeavor and other categories. So we have also presented, though, artists such as Li Mingwei, who is an international artist and is originally from Taiwan and was educated in the United States and counts as his home multiple cities. And more broadly at the Smithsonian, we also have the Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship and artists such as Beatrice Glow, who was at the Portrait Gallery, but she herself, her work is really expansive and really thinks about allyship as she really addresses topics in her work more broadly. And more broadly at the Smithsonian, of course, we have, I just give you some data as to what our staff makeup. We also have an international scope in terms of the Tropical Research Institute in Panama, the Office of International Relations, the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, among others. And on a unit-specific or museum-specific role, we all work towards questions of diversity, equity, and inclusion on the museum level, as well as through centers such as the Smithsonian Latino Center, the Asian Pacific American Center, and initiatives such as the American Women's History Initiative. So of course, more remains to be done in the field, as we have learned through several surveys, and I'm just only showing you two sets of numbers here from the most recent Mellon AMD survey in 2018, which we may all be familiar with. And really throughout all of these discussions, what we have are keywords that keep on coming up. And these are some terms that may mean the same thing to many of us, but maybe not to all. So with these keywords in mind and some of the background that we are sharing with you today, we wanted to bring these experiences, these themes, and concerns about how we work across borders with a lot of these concerns in mind. So thank you so much, and I'll let James take it away now.
So, hi, I'm James Clisson, curator at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. And if this is working, you can see a slide of the globe and various countries in the globe and various legal regimes under which queer people live. And I've long wanted to do a project, or how I came to this and how I came to this panel is that I've long wanted to do a project that thought about diversity in a broad sense. And I thought myself being a queer person, and also knowing what I know in my own life, bringing my own life experience to the project, I knew that the way a project like this might slice things would be quite different and quite stark as one goes from country to country, or even in the United States from state to state, where certain kinds of discrimination is, as we all know, and are sometimes being challenged in the Supreme Court right now. There's an interesting case about trans rights that's being considered by the court at this moment. Thinking about how these slice, how they play out in artistic practices. So it felt to me like really, when Leslie approached me about this, I felt like it was a great topic. I'm gonna go, oh, wait, I jumped right in. I forgot to acknowledge AMC, and I forgot to acknowledge Lucy, who I think has done a tremendous amount of work to organize all of us. And also, one more acknowledgement. In light of the last panel, which I thought was incredibly enlightening, I learned quite a lot, I'd like to acknowledge that here in Santa Barbara, we are on Chumash land, and we are on the land of the Chumash people. Now, two artists who I've had conversations with who might be part of this project are Erinch Zeman and Salman Tor. Erinch's piece, Family Values, is pen and ink drawing. He's based in Istanbul, has lived abroad, has lived in Germany. And then on the right is Salman Tor, who was born in Lahore, Pakistan, but now lives in New York City, and I learned recently became a United States citizen. And I thought these are two interesting examples and one of many. I'm at the very beginning, I should say I'm at the very beginning of this project, and there's a lot of people I have to speak to. And a lot of research still left to do. But I thought what was fascinating about this is we have two artists, one with a connection to Turkey, the other with a connection to Pakistan, and both working in a fairly representational and one might say slightly traditional way, and thinking about social networks around their own lives and themselves. In the case of Arendt, it's family and family values, this bourgeois family hidden by this still life. And on the left, Salmon's work, I think, is much more kind of joyous and light. We see some contemporary New Yorkers or Brooklynites, maybe, all queer men enjoying a bit of repose and sociology. There's a martini glass and there's some sort of piece of fabric on the lamp that's made everything green, and some people are dancing and chatting. So two very different approaches, two very different life trajectories. And my hope in the show, which is 3 to 4 years off, we can begin to have many other kinds of voices included. Okay. With that, I am going to pass this on to the next panelist.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? Yes, okay. So good morning. It's about 4:15 a.m. here in Taipei. My name is Leslie Ma. I'm a curator at M+ Hong Kong, specializing in ink art. So today I want to first thank all the AAMC organizers, as well as Leslie and James, for inviting me. I'm not sick. I have morning allergies, just to let everyone know. But I wanted to talk about first about M+, a new museum that's coming up in Hong Kong next year. You see some basic information here on my front slide. We are a 20th and 21st century museum focusing on visual art, design, architecture, and moving image in Asia and beyond. And it's a museum that's really thinking about how we think about visual culture from the Asian perspective. As now we're based in Hong Kong, but we are serving a larger audience, not only mainland China, but also international visitors, hoping that when this pandemic finishes, or at least dies down, we can really count on the international visitors to come in. But on the right, on the left, you see our building rendering designed by Herzog de Meuron, and on the right, you see a basic breakdown of the spaces. So it's actually a gigantic museum. We've been working since 2011 to build a collection, as well as recruiting, which we'll get to later. But I want to talk about my specialty in ink art at the museum, because to think about curating across borders, we want to broaden a lot of ideas about what Asia is. So in this slide, you see basic key moments of visual culture from 1930s to the present that our current collection covers. The collection has included works by artists from Hong Kong, China, as well as other places in East Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and that's the majority, which is about 75%. But we also have works by influential makers from beyond the world, around the world. So in a way, it's from an Asian perspective to look at what's happening in visual culture. And so here in this slide, you have a very, I guess, a snapshot of what we have. Total collection items now, it's about just over 5,000 pieces. So you see here from Isamu Noguchi to Namjoon Paik, to ink art artist, which is on the bottom here, Irene Chow, as well as a graphic designer from Hong Kong, Alan Chen, as well as other people that you might be more familiar with. So you see, as an ink art, as part of this very international collection, we want to think about how to broaden this idea. But I want to start with what ink art is. Ink art is an area of visual culture, specifically visual art, that focuses on works and artists that have been reshaping, reinterpreting the traditional ink painting and calligraphy tradition. So in a way, they might be working with the materials of ink painting and calligraphy, or using the philosophy. So in a way, it's not limited, and I try to make it not limited to a national construct, because as we know, many cultures within East Asia deals with this visual culture heritage. But also I want to look at, within our collection that's so international and interdisciplinary, how do we see ink art as something that's crossing borders and transnational? So here's an exhibition that I made back in 2017 as a part of a series of collection shows that M+ has put on in order to let our audience know about what M+ is about. And everything's drawn from the collection. The title is The Weight of Lightness, Ink Art at M+. And here you see some examples of installation shots. Most people will think about an ink art exhibition as based mostly as Chinese and works of ink on paper. But here we can look at a lot of works that deal with this direct ways of artists communicating through the material paper, or reinventing the ideas of calligraphy, but also drawing together connections using a comparative history, comparative art history way of looking at ink art. On the top left, you see a cluster of works on paper by mainland Chinese artist Qiu Deshu, Indian artist Krishna Reddy, and American artist Nick Mouse, all coming from different backgrounds, as well as different approaches to works on paper. And they all work with ink on paper, except for Nick Mouse, which is actually glazed on ceramics. But you see that they share kind of affinity in this mark making, this kind of direct engagement with the instruments. On the bottom left, you see three artists, top two from Japan in the 1960s, and contemporary Chinese artist Xu Bing on the bottom in a vitrine case there. I'm trying to compare different ways of engaging in calligraphy and the idea of script. Marita Shiryu and Hidai Nankoku are two avant-garde calligraphers from Japan in the mid-20th century. And here you see them trying to bridge between calligraphy and painting. None of these scripts, the marks they're making, are characters, but they use the calligraphic tradition to engage with their own ways of making marks. Trying to challenging what's the border between calligraphy and abstract painting. As we all know, that's the lingua franca in that time in mid-20th century. But we try to juxtapose that with contemporary Chinese artists making new scripts that are not entirely readable. To wrap up, on the right, you see two female artists, Dong Yangzi, which is through this doorway there, and also Etal Adnan in this vitrine case, two artists from very different cultures. Dong Yangzi is a Taiwanese, mainland-born Taiwanese artist working with contemporary calligraphy, one of the most renowned calligraphers in our region. And Etal Adnan, of course, everyone knows of her very intricate paintings as well as drawings. But these two artists from different cultures, different times and different approaches, working with ink on paper, but with very similar, I would say, connections and affinity. So this is a way for us to look at ink art, originally very regional based kind of and tradition based approach, but looking at it through a more international, transnational, and a liberal way. So that's how ink art fits in the entire collection of M+, that's visual culture based. So that's where I'm coming from in terms of inclusion and diversity, and breaking some preconceptions of a specific specialty. So I will pass that on to the next speaker, and thank you, and I will look forward to talking to you more later.
Okay, can you hear me and do you see a different slide? Okay. So I'm Bridget Cooks, and I'm really thrilled to be part of this event. I want to thank the organizers of AAMC, Lucy Leiden, the Leslies who are on the panel, David, and James as well. I'm kind of the outsider because I'm a professor, but I do write about museum exhibitions. I wrote a book called Exhibiting Blackness about the history of exhibiting work by African American artists in American art museums. And I curate other shows, particularly focusing on African American artists, but not exclusively. But I was honored to be asked to be part of this conversation. And I'm focusing specifically on borders, but borders within the United States. And there are many, many borders within the United States. I just wanted to focus on one particular case study, and this is Kehinde Wiley's Rumors of War. And I picked this because I was really stunned by this outrageous, in some ways, outrageous and unexpected and very large and incredibly public, right? You can't get too much more public than Times Square. And I thought, well, how did this happen? And what happened to the sculpture once it left Times Square? So I just wanted to bring this to the conversation today and thinking about ideas of borders within the United States. So the curator who's responsible for Kehinde Wiley Sculpture Rumors of War is Valerie Cassell Oliver, and you can see her in the circle with Kehinde Wiley, who's the artist. And so I've been in conversation with Valerie about this whole process so I could speak with you today. So she's the Lewis Family Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond, Virginia. Public art is part of her job description. Wiley visited the museum in 2016 when they were mounting an exhibition called A New Republic. And he had never been to Richmond before, was absolutely stunned by all of the monuments celebrating the Confederacy. And he extended his visit in order to really study them. He focused on the image that I'm showing you on the right of J.E.B. Stuart from 1905. And Stuart is a Confederate hero. He was a major general in the Army of Northern Virginia of the Confederate States of America. He worked side by side with Robert E. Lee. He was killed in battle in 1864, very close to the site of the monument, which is located in a space called Monument Avenue in Richmond. So on this slide, I'm just giving you a sense of context. In the top left, you can see Monument Avenue. Just in terms of scale, I think it's really important for us to understand how impressive and imposing these sculptures are. Look at the size of the cars and then look at the size of the sculpture, and they're very imposing too in the fact that they're in the way. There are these in the center making these glorietas, these traffic circles, and it goes on for blocks and blocks and blocks. And so what Kehinde wanted to do was to make a work that was based philosophically on the two-dimensional paintings that he's known for, which show African-American men and some women sort of as the foundation of a whole series of works that he's done internationally, but having the representation of contemporary people of color in the positions of historic, wealthy people, patrons, Confederate heroes, gods, royalty, all of these things. But here he really wanted to focus on addressing the Confederacy in a kind of replacement model. And for him, it was about creating a new language and narrative for the South, particularly in Virginia, which was a former capital of the Confederacy. He was focusing, along with Valerie, on the effectiveness of the work being about empowerment and transformation, but also visibility of African-American people. There are lots of Black people in the South, but not in public art. And he wanted to sort of usurp this trope of power through this particular sculptural form. Around the same time, Times Square Arts approached Wiley about making a site-specific work for Times Square, and Valerie said, well, why don't we just make this sculpture serve both functions? And so it premiered in New York in Times Square as a kind of test run, and then came to Richmond, Virginia. So I wanted to show you also this black and white picture at the top right, the Confederate reunion parade in front of Jefferson Davis's monument on Monument Avenue when it was unveiled June 3rd, 1907. I just want to give you a sense of the very long legacy of this particular site-specific space. That's a very sacred space for neo-Nazis and anti-Black protesters. Below the black and white photograph, you can see a more recent celebration of Confederate heritage in the exact same place. And then on the bottom left, you can see vandalizing of the Robert E. Lee Monument with red paint and graffiti saying that Black Lives Matter. So I'm just going to move to the last slide. I just want to show you a detail of both of these sculptures together. And again, thinking about scale with Rumors of War on the right side. And I'll just read this note from Valerie. The sculpture that Kehinde made is a one-to-one appropriation of the J.E.B. Stewart Monument. The scale of the sculpture, including the base, is exact in its ratio. And so that is interesting to me, that it really is to scale, that it's a kind of strategy of fighting fire with the same material, the same size, and close to the same place, really transforming or beginning to transform through criticizing a kind of sacred border for Confederate heritage in a way that reflects people who are living there now that don't share the same values. So that is my 8.5 minutes. So I'm going to pass it on to the next person, I think to David.
Okay, I hope everybody can see me now. Thank you so much for this invitation. It's a little bit strange for me to be talking in this platform, but let's do that. I want to thank Leslie, James, and of course, Association Curator for inviting me to talk about these issues. Right now, I want to share with you a border. What are you seeing is a specific border that is produced by a civilization encounter between humans and nature. What are you seeing is the Lake Texcoco in Mexico City. It was a Mason Lake that was dried by, even by the Aztecas, but intensified by Spanish colonizations. And right now, Lake Texcoco is almost at living dead structure, a living dead ecology, a living dead politics. If somebody of you know, Lake Texcoco was almost dried the last years because the past government wanted to make an international airport in the base of the lake. It wasn't be able to do it because the current government stopped the construction of the airport. But what we're seeing here is a city, a Mexico City, who is engaged, who is in touch with with a surface of space that is really difficult to understand. It is not romantical ecology, romantical landscape as we understand it. It is not a productive land, but it is not be able to be capped by the city. What we're looking at is a really difficult conversation between two bodies, and a border and two bodies, the body of the city and the body of the land, of the territories. And I want to share with you a project that we made with an artist, Adriana Salazar. She was engaged in the memory and the living and the dead of the Lake Texcoco. She made, with our help, an experimental archaeology, trying to find pieces, materials, objects that we can use to understand mortal living explorations about the lake. What you are seeing right now is an exhibition that we made in Palacio Clavijero in Morelia, Michoacán, 200 kilometers away from Lake Texcoco. In these exhibitions, we wanted to engage with reclaiming animisms, as Isabel Stenger's put it, but also reclaiming perspectivisms, as the Brazilian anthropologist Eduardo Viveiros de Castro invited us to do. So we decided to take every object, every rock, every garbage as a person with biography, with feelings, with communications, with needs, engage with humans' life, but also engaging with the life of the lake. So the Animist Museum of Lake Texcoco wanted to create an ecological, a political ecology intervention in the museum, invite us to see what is the remaining of the lake, but also make us learn how we can engage with the living of this territory. In this, I'm going to focus in this last slide, because there is a lot of things happening here. The first thing is we use and we elaborate how to say it, a common mediation and curatorial approach with exhibitions. We don't understand each of these pieces as art. We understand the project or exhibit, the memory of Lake Texcoco inside a museum as art. So the Animist Museum is like a museum inside a museum, an art project inside a museum. And the art project is the interdisciplinary approach between ecology, sociology, anthropology, engineer, geochemistry, paleontology, archaeology, to understand each of these objects, but also to engage with mortal living's histories, but also with communities' stories. So what we're looking at is the students of the university trying to recreate situated knowledge of every one of these objects. And the people who are joining us is the lake activists, not in Texcoco, but in Michoacán, 200 kilometers away. These are lake people. These people know and understand the stories of the objects, of the stories of the water, because they want also to preserve their own waters, and they don't want it to make their own waters as the water of Lake Texcoco. So what happened here is a discussion about how we can engage with the perspectives of an object. Every single object wants to tell us a story. How this plastic came here, how this glass came here, why a lake had not only dust, water, plants, but also have another kind of materials that we understand as garbage. Why there are garbage here, and why it's important to realize that that garbage is the story of humans living, interacting with waters. Some of the most important things about these experiments is the exhibition is like itself a performance. Everybody is producing knowledge, producing interconnections, finding some cartographies or perspectives about how to deal with the lake. That is what Adriana Salazar and I, we call it as artistic research. We want to use the museum, we want to use the apparatus of representation and production of knowledge as the museum as a way to interconnect with another stories. Not to show, but also to produce relations, to produce knowledge, to produce dialogues. So what very interesting to do here is also was part of one of my classes, my curatorial classes in the university. We wanted to create a living museum, a museum that was not to just to look at. It's a museum to engage with current life, engage with quotidianity, and also produce a multilingual cross-border experience. Because there is more than one language. Of course, we did it in Spanish, but the person you are seeing there is also a Purépecha talkers. And also, we are trying to speak in a language that it is not human language, it's the objects animist language. So we use patrimony, natural patrimony, as a way to make insertion in the museum, just to elaborate more complex things. I think I'm going to leave it here and we can talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to everyone for their contributions. We'll start. I certainly have questions for all of you, and I know that James, well, you all have questions for each other as well, and we'll be taking questions through the Q&A screen, so hopefully I won't miss any of your questions. But thank you so much for such a this diversity of topics that you've all brought to the table, our virtual table here. And I wanted to throw out a broader question for all of you, which is, what does curating across borders mean to each of you? If you can have a confessional moment, I guess. If anyone wants to take that question first, please raise your hand. I'll mute myself. Or not. No.
I'll start.
All right, go, James.
My confessional thing is I'm learning how to do it. This project, I just moved to Santa Barbara. I've been here just about 2.5 months. The virus hit, so all sorts of networking and outreach that I'd hoped to do in person just needs to wait, which is okay. Periods of reflection are good. So I'm figuring it out. But I think thinking about what the really excellent panels were saying earlier today, a lot of curating across borders is just listening, taking the time to reach out to the appropriate people, engaging in dialogue, and not being in a big hurry, and to involve people. And so I'm at a research phase, and I will be for the next couple of years, but I am looking for institutional partners for this project, thinking about queer communities in a global way. But hopefully I can find some institutional partners. But for the moment, I don't know quite how to curate across borders, but I'm going to figure it out by talking to people. So.
That's great. David, you're raising your hand.
I wanted to talk with Bridget because it's a challenge to use iconography. Let me put it as I understand it. Maybe it is not the correct word. It is not, please correct me. To use white iconography and white monumentality to reconnect the efforts of living and survival of a huge amount of communities who hasn't not been represented as heroes, but use erosity to make a critical intervention in the public imagination of what is past and what must be remembered and what must be celebrated. Please tell me something about that, because I get so excited with this monument.
Well, I was thinking about two different approaches, and I don't think these are the only two, but when we think about curating across borders, maybe we have two choices. I mean, what's interesting about the Rumors of War is that he's working in the same form as the form that he's trying to address. So you think about, dismantling the master's house with master's tools. I mean, that's one approach to it. You speak in the same language of form. But another approach is using other kinds of forms of technology, of materials, to speak to a history that comes through a different kind of form. And I think that both kinds of approaches address or they kind of work through different sensibilities. For some people, this two monuments that have so much in common is really a horrible affront. Like, how dare you? This is our sacred white supremacist language. Other people might say, you know, we are saying something different. We are not like those people who are on Monument Avenue. We don't want to use that form, you know, at all. Like, let's just leave that separate and do something new and create a new language. So I think what's interesting is that he is taking this conservative form, and I think people will look at the sculpture and see that it is an African-American person, but it's possible that they might look at it and it might kind of blend in with the others. So I think it's an interesting conversation to have about how visibility works for different people. I appreciate that this is exactly the same form in the same scale, and that it is also outside, and that it's also in the same area, because the site specificity of it, I think, has an important impact.
Thank you so much. We do have some questions that have started to come in, so we'll do a mixture of opening the floor. So there is one question about how about the borders of different medium, and why are we focusing on medium specificity, ink or performance? So it'd be great to, I guess, Leslie or maybe Bridget or anyone who'd like to take this up.
So I'll quickly explain, I guess, the medium specificity question. Ink is not specifically a medium. Maybe I should clarify that. It's actually for M+, and for me, we focus on it from a cultural and philosophical side. So it's more of aesthetics more than just ink on paper. Just happens that the slides that I showed are artists working in a flat medium. But we do look at artists who deal with this reinterpreting traditional ink painting and calligraphy through animation, through installation, through sculptures, and other kinds of ways to engage with the tradition. I mean, as more mediums and instruments and ideas become available to artists today, they can look at a traditional concept, aesthetics, and idea using their own best tools. So then we have works more than inks on paper. So that's a quick way of crossing that border medium from my perspective.
Go ahead, David. Go ahead.
For me, the media question is so important, because in what I'm talking to do with political ecology and artistic research is to make a more complex relationship between media. Media, we can understand it as a way to do things. So, for example, right now we are still working with lakes, and we're using performance art as a way to understand and to communicate with lakes. And also we also use photography. And photography is a really specific kind of media because it can join together a different point of view, not only in the frame of the picture, but also in the use of the picture. Because geologists, ecologists, and artists produce a different approaches of knowledge and even political insinuations in the same picture. So for us, the medium has to be specified is in the process of the work, in the process of the investigation, of the process of the community. And we have to choose with what precise media is going to help us in the question we have. Because if we use a different media, we are producing a different knowledge and a different representation. So it's a really discussion. What media do we use? We use picture, painting, performance, theater. It's always a discussion, a really enjoyable discussion. I think media is an important question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The next question we have is, how do you all think about in your practices the role or the challenge of translation in curating across borders? And I know we have a bilingual museum or partly bilingual museum, so, but I know, David, you're nodding vigorously. And Leslie, I know that in Hong Kong, you're also working with different languages in a way. So it'd be great if one of you would like to take that, or both of you.
Okay. For me, sorry, I take the word. For me, it's difficult because it is not only between Spanish and English. It's also between Purépecha language, that is the language of the autochthonous community, original people from the state of Michoacán, and also Otomi people who are the autonomous people from the Lake Texcoco. So it's very difficult because I don't speak Purépecha or Otomi. So it's always a political conflict because I understand and conceptualize in Spanish, or sometimes in English, but they don't do that in Spanish. And the semantics of the word, for example, water, is really complex. But also, we have dealing with another language that it is not human language. It's the semiotics of the materials, the living beings, the animals, the plants, the rocks, the object itself. They are producing, they are making us know something that we just put it in words. So mythology, rituals are so important to translate that meanings. But for me, as a foreign Mexican, I'm from Colombia, but I'm living in Mexico, it's even more complex because I'm using Spanish to translate something that has meaning in Purépecha. So we're dealing with that all day. So I think sometimes we do it wrong, but sometimes we do it right. So it's a question to do it every day.
For us, M+ is a bilingual environment, and we serve audiences from around the Chinese-speaking world as well as the international world. So Chinese and English are the major two languages. For all our outputs in text form and all the conferences and live forms, we have simultaneous translation for conferences. For Cantonese is a local language. It's a dialect of Chinese, so that's very important. So we have Cantonese, Mandarin, and English. But for text output, what's really interesting is that the usage of Chinese language in Hong Kong is different from mainland China, as well as different from Taiwan, even though the script, the writing is the same. So because we are a Hong Kong-based museum, a lot of the translation work done, or the writing work, we use the Hong Kong usage. It's hard to bring an example here, but we try to respect the place that we're in. So let's say minimalism is called this in Cantonese, the way of writing. So we use that instead of the way that's used in mainland China or Taiwan. So that's a very basic example. But like David, we deal with this all day. We have colleagues from all different places to sit down and discuss, well, what do we call this here? What do we call this here? And what's most understandable for our local audience. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. No, thank you so much. There's a question specifically for Bridget. How do you see other Black artists engaging with this notion of moving across borders through their works?
Well, I would say the example that comes to mind immediately is Lava Thomas, who is based in San Francisco. She recently won a competition to have a monument to Maya Angelou in San Francisco. She won it, there were many people who submitted and she won, and her monument did not look like Rumors of War, and it didn't look like anything on Monument Avenue. It was a different form. It was a flat sort of plinth that would sit on the sidewalk, and there was an image of Maya Angelou and then a quotation from her. And so after she was awarded or told that she won, and it was announced, then someone, and I forget the person's name, but it's not a secret, if you look this up, you'll find it, decided, oh, no, when I said monument, I meant the monument that you're used to seeing, the man on a horse, a man in a chair, a man standing up. And so we're rescinding the award. So she was so the award was taken away from her. She wasn't allowed, just using the terminology that we're thinking of today, to sort of cross that border of form, that there was one specific way to think about what a monument looks like. And so still, that hasn't been resolved, but I don't think that she's being considered anymore. It's a loss. And so having the opportunity to create something new, to cross a border, that was sacred space. It was like, no, we're not doing that. So anyway, that's just the example that came to mind immediately of borders of form and traditions within the United States.
Thank you. Thanks, Bridget.
Yeah.
We have a lot of questions coming in, and I wanted to also see if one of you would be open to sharing what the discussions of equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion consist of at your organizations. I mean, we use all these terms, and I know that we read the surveys, we work on the surveys, we answer the surveys, but are these surveys, are these things that are transmittable, are they transferable beyond, whether it's something that's done here in the United States, or how does that work elsewhere? If it does, or it doesn't. No one's answering. David or David? Yeah.
I was thinking this. I'm engaged with queer politics, and for me, it's so important. And the museums that we were working are small museums, museums in the small cities that make us a disadvantage, but that also produce another opportunities. And the opportunities is that we can be more relaxed in the way we administrate the exhibition room. Of course, we have problems of accession, physical problems of accession. Disabled people and communities cannot access for themselves for the space, and that is a problem. That is real a problem. It's an ethical problem, a political problem. But it's not only that. It's how we can produce a kind of specific story about ecology in the exhibition room that engage with the interests of people. And that's people who could produce knowledge, reflection, and actions using the invitation of the exhibition room. That has been a challenge. I think we're dealing with that every day. Of course, we're working with activists. Of course, we're working with communities. Of course, we engage with them. They are not the public, but the agency that we talk. But we also need publics, other people that are not ourselves, and they don't talk our language. And they don't see the world as we as academic curators, artists, and indigenous leaderships understand the world. We also need them. And I think we have a failure in that. It's in the production of how we can connect with that interest and understand and respect that interest.
Thank you. We have about 7 or so more minutes before we have to say goodbye, but there are some more questions. Thank you so much, Debbie, for that. But can you, someone please speak about reciprocity in cross-border curation, both its importance and challenges?
I'll just say something just to echo, what's been said, I think, here and in previous conversations today, how important it is to think about listening and collaboration, right? And in the previous panel, part of what was great about that was the conversation about maybe getting outside of yourself as the curator and the author. And if we're really going to have reciprocity, if we're really going to change, right, that we have to really change our ideas of authority. And that is very hard for, especially our large, old, major museums, because that's kind of all they have. They've got the authority to say, this is beautiful, we say so. And we are the ones that make those decisions. So to have to share that sense of authority and power and lean out or move over or make space, I think terrifies some people, and it should be empowering instead. You should be, if you're interested in making change, you should figure out a way to use your position and privilege to make things better and to really engage a public that's already there but might be ignoring you until you make a big mistake.
Those are great words. Thank you, Bridget. Well, mistakes seem to be part of the previous panel also mentioned mistakes. So it's
Yeah, right.
It's definitely a trend, and sometimes those mistakes are necessary for us to learn beyond that. So
Yeah.
Sorry, yes, James.
I add something really quickly to just bridges on what Bridget has said, but it's in the spirit of what Bridget has said and what has been said in the other panels today, which I found very inspiring, which is that real collaboration involves giving over power and listening. It also, at a more practical level, requires building trust. And we talk about collaboration in the abstract, but it's actually people coming to be comfortable with each other in the same space, like any other kind of human relationship. So it'll have its ups and downs, and there'll be miscommunication. But we all know that you build a relationship by putting in time. And then the other one, which I think is easy to forget, is also, if you're trying to involve a lot of other people, you have to be really organized, because disorganization, and that's almost an aside, maybe it's obvious, but disorganization can come across as either rudeness or a desire not to include, when it's just, we'll say maybe people aren't good with Zoom or something. They're not, but that's all I wanted to say. Nothing profound, but just remembering we are humans when we collaborate, and there's an emotional exchange.
Thank you. Maybe one more question then, I know we've asked you all to think of, closing thoughts, and I think we're getting to the point of recommendations or hints of how to work across borders, but there was this idea about, can you please talk about the reciprocity in cross-border curation and its importance and challenges, and how do we work across border? How do we have these, and part of this has been already discussed in terms of the relationships that we're building, but how do we address this as we're working across borders? Or not?
We're thinking.
You're thinking, okay, well, you're thinking.
Yeah. Just say a small thing. Reciprocity, for our understanding, as Adriana Salazar put it in her job and the work we're doing together, means that we need to take care of the interests, necessities, and challenge that my colleague are taking on. And it is a reciprocity for me as a curator, working at the museums. It is not is to use the experimental way of the curatorship and the museum, the exhibition room, as a way to take care of that interest and challenge. And also, we ask them to be co-responsible about the needs and the importance of defense of the museum's institutions, because we need that also them defends the institutions, defends the museum, defends our practice, so we can also represent and produce knowledge and feelings about the challenge of their lives. So it's a responsibility of the public. It is not only the responsibility of the museum. We have to work together.
Thank you. There are a few more questions that are lingering, and I apologize. I know we have to wrap up because of time. Time is of the essence, but I really want to thank everyone on the panel, and if anyone would like to take a stab at saying some last words. It's really been a joy to work with all of you in planning for today, and if anything, our panel has definitely worked across borders, at least on Zoom and Skype and WhatsApp, but I really hope that we can all continue this conversation beyond this hour that we have here today. And anyone who, and I apologize, there are other questions that are still lingering. If there, please do feel free to reach out to us, and we are happy to share the questions, and we can continue the conversation in other spaces from here on out. So James, would you like to add anything?
Just thank you to the audience who I can't see. I find it very unnerving. I have to having no one to respond to. But it's been great to work with all of you. I've learned a lot, and I'm really happy AAMC made the decision to make sure this conference happened. It's one of the few things on my calendar, at least, that didn't evaporate. So thank you all.
Thank you.
And take care, everyone. Please take care of yourselves and your loved ones and everyone else. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Leslie, have a rest.
Thank you. Bye.